In a galaxy filled with stars, planets, and countless life forms, peace was often as rare as the mythical crystals of Zinar. For centuries, the Zinari Empire had ruled over their corner of space with grace and wisdom. Their shimmering cities floated among the clouds of their homeworld, glowing softly under twin suns. But peace came at a cost. Recently, tensions between humanity and the Zinari had reached a boiling point. Skirmishes along the borders of their territories threatened to escalate into full-blown war. To prevent disaster, leaders from both sides agreed on an ancient solution: an arranged marriage. It wasn't romantic or idealistic, but it was practical. A union between the two races would symbolize unity and bind them together in ways treaties could not. That was how Princess Lizira found herself standing before her advisors, staring at holographic images of Commander Cal Draven, humanity's most celebrated and feared war hero. Lizira was no stranger to duty. As the youngest daughter of the Zinari royal family, she had grown up learning diplomacy, strategy, and sacrifice. Her bioluminescent skin sparkled faintly when she felt strong emotions, making her feelings hard to hide. Now, as she listened to her advisors explain why this marriage was necessary, her glow dimmed with every word. She clenched her hands tightly behind her back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why must it be him?" she asked finally, unable to mask her frustration. Commander Draven is known across the galaxy for his ruthlessness. His victories are built on destruction. How can we trust such a man? Her chief advisor, Elder Vale, sighed deeply. He was old, even by Zinari standards, his translucent skin marked with faint scars from battles long past. "Princess," he said gently, "it is precisely because of his reputation that he has been chosen. Humanity respects strength, and Commander Draven embodies it. If you wish to secure peace, you must show them that we are equally strong." "But what about me?" Lizira whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "What if I cannot endure being tied to someone so different, so harsh?" Vale placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you think, Your Highness. This will not just be a political alliance. It may also be an opportunity to understand humans better, to bridge the gap between our peoples." Despite his words, Lizira couldn't shake off her unease. Humans were strange creatures, loud and unpredictable compared to the serene Zinari. They spoke quickly, moved aggressively, and seemed driven by emotions they barely understood themselves. And then there was Cal Draven, whose name alone sent shivers down her spine. Stories of his battlefield tactics painted him as cold and calculating, willing to do whatever it took to win, even if it meant leaving devastation in his wake. Days passed in a blur as preparations for her journey to Earth began. Servants packed her belongings while diplomats finalized the details of her arrival. Lizira tried to focus on the positives. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe Commander Draven wasn't as terrible as everyone made him out to be. Deep down, though, she doubted it. Every report she read about him only confirmed her fears. Finally, the day arrived. Standing aboard the sleek transport ship that would carry her to Earth's orbital station, Lizira took one last look at her homeworld. The golden light of the twin suns bathed the floating cities in warmth, creating a scene so beautiful it made her heart ache. Would she ever see it again? Or would she spend the rest of her days trapped in a cold, unfamiliar world? As the ship ascended into the starry void, Lizira resolved to approach this situation carefully. She would observe Commander Draven closely, studying his actions and mannerisms. If he truly was as cruel as the stories claimed, she would find a way to protect herself and her people from him. But if there was more to him than met the eye, well, she wasn't ready to consider that possibility yet. For now, all she could do was wait and hope that the universe had something brighter in store for her. Little did she know, her meeting with Commander Cal Draven would change everything she thought she knew, not just about humans, but about herself as well. The journey to Earth's orbital station felt endless. Princess Lizira spent most of her time in the ship's observation lounge, gazing out at the vast expanse of stars. The quiet hum of the engines and the soft glow of distant suns provided little comfort as her mind raced with questions. What would Commander Cal Draven be like in person? Would he live up to his fearsome reputation? Or was there more beneath the surface? She tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on memorizing human customs and etiquette from the data tablets her advisors had given her. When the transport ship finally docked at the orbital station, Lazira stepped onto the platform with a mix of trepidation and determination. Her shimmering royal robes caught the artificial light, casting faint reflections on the polished metal floor. Around her, a grand procession of dignitaries and military personnel awaited her arrival. Human soldiers stood rigidly at attention, their uniforms crisp and their expressions unreadable. Zenari delegates flanked her, their glowing forms providing a stark contrast to the humans' muted tones. Despite her unease, Lazira held her head high, projecting the regal poise expected of her. She scanned the crowd for any sign of Commander Draven, but saw only unfamiliar faces. Just as she began to wonder if he would even bother attending her welcome ceremony, a hush fell over the assembly. Slowly, a figure emerged from the back of the room. A tall, broad-shouldered man, clad in sleek combat armor that gleamed under the lights. His presence commanded immediate attention. Cal Draven moved with an air of authority, his every step deliberate and measured. He stopped just a few paces away from Lazira, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lazira felt her bioluminescent skin flicker slightly, betraying her nervousness. Up close, Kale looked even more imposing than she'd imagined. His jaw was sharp, his shoulders wide, and his entire demeanor radiated strength. But there was something else about him, something unexpected. "Princess Lazira," he said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "Welcome to our orbital station. It is an honor to meet you." His tone was polite, almost gentle, which surprised her. She had braced herself for arrogance or indifference, but instead, she heard sincerity in his words. Gathering her composure, she inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Commander Draven," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Thank you for your hospitality." A brief silence followed before Kale gestured toward the assembled dignitaries. "Please allow me to introduce you to some key members of my team who will assist during your stay here." With that, he led her through the crowd, introducing her to various officers and officials. As they walked, Lazira studied him carefully. Though his movements were confident, there was no trace of the cruelty she had anticipated. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that intrigued her. Later, during a formal reception held in her honor, Lazira found herself seated beside Kale at a long banquet table. The room buzzed with conversation as humans and Zenari mingled awkwardly, exchanging pleasantries while eyeing each other warily. Plates of exotic foods filled the table, though Lazira barely touched hers. Her focus remained on Kel, who seemed equally preoccupied. At one point, a young human officer approached them, clearly eager to impress his commander. "Sir," the officer began, "we've received updates on the security protocols for tomorrow's events. Everything is proceeding smoothly." Kale nodded thoughtfully. "Good work, Lieutenant. Keep me informed of any changes." Then, turning to Lazira, he added, "I understand this may all feel overwhelming, Princess. If there's anything specific you need, don't hesitate to ask." Lazira blinked, momentarily taken aback by his consideration. "Thank you, Commander," she said softly. "Your efforts are appreciated." As the evening wore on, Lazira noticed subtle details about Kale that contradicted the stories she'd heard. When speaking with others, he listened intently, nodding occasionally to show understanding. He didn't dominate conversations or interrupt. Instead, he gave everyone space to express themselves. Even when addressing lower-ranking officers, he treated them with respect, never once raising his voice or displaying impatience. By the end of the night, Lazira realized she had been watching Kel far too closely. Each interaction revealed new facets of his personality. Calm, thoughtful, disciplined. Was this truly the same man rumored to be ruthless and unyielding? Or was this merely a facade designed to win her trust? Before retiring to her quarters, Kale escorted her personally, ensuring she reached her destination safely. As they stood outside her door, he paused for a moment, meeting her gaze once more. "I know this arrangement isn't easy for either of us," he admitted quietly. "But I want you to know that I'm committed to making it work for both our peoples." Lizira hesitated, unsure how to respond. There was vulnerability in his voice, a hint of uncertainty that made him seem human. For the first time since learning of their engagement, she allowed herself to entertain the possibility that perhaps Cal Draven wasn't the monster she had feared. Perhaps he was simply a man burdened by responsibility, much like herself. As she entered her quarters and closed the door behind her, Lizira leaned against the cool metal wall, letting out a shaky breath. Her mind swirled with conflicting thoughts. Could she really trust him? Only time would tell. But for now, one thing was certain. Her first impression of Commander Cal Draven had left her more curious and less afraid than she ever expected. The days following Lizira's arrival at Earth's orbital station unfolded in a whirlwind of formal ceremonies, diplomatic meetings, and cultural exchanges. Though her schedule was packed, Lizira found herself stealing moments to observe Commander Cal Draven from afar. He was always busy, leading discussions, reviewing security protocols, or greeting dignitaries. But she couldn't help noticing small details about him that defied her expectations. One morning, during a tense negotiation between human council members and Scifi delegates, Cal's calm demeanor stood out. The discussion revolved around trade agreements, with both sides growing increasingly frustrated as disagreements mounted. Voices rose, tempers flared, and it seemed as though the meeting would collapse into chaos. But Cal remained steady, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room as he listened intently to each argument. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't raise his voice or assert dominance. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, addressing everyone with measured respect. "I understand the concerns on both sides," he said, his tone firm yet soothing. "But if we focus on our shared goals, peace and prosperity, we can find common ground." To Lizira's surprise, he proposed compromises that benefited both parties, earning nods of reluctant approval from even the most stubborn negotiators. Watching him navigate the situation so skillfully, Lizira felt a flicker of admiration. This wasn't the ruthless warlord she had imagined. This was someone who genuinely cared about finding solutions. Her glowing skin dimmed slightly as she mulled over this revelation. Could it be possible that Cal's reputation was exaggerated, or perhaps misunderstood? Determined to learn more, Lizira decided to test him further. She had heard whispers among the humans about Cal's legendary discipline and near-perfect composure. Was he truly unshakable, or did cracks lie beneath his polished exterior? Late one evening, after another long day of events, she slipped away from her entourage, under the pretense of needing fresh air. In truth, she wanted to explore the bustling city below the orbital station, hoping to see how ordinary humans lived. Disguising herself in a simple cloak to avoid drawing attention, Lizira descended to Earth's surface via a transport shuttle. The city sprawled before her, alive with neon lights, towering skyscrapers, and crowds of people rushing through streets filled with vendors and musicians. It was overwhelming but fascinating. For the first time since arriving, she felt a sense of freedom, not weighed down by titles or responsibilities. As she wandered deeper into the city, however, trouble found her. A group of protesters gathered nearby, their signs condemning the alliance between humans and Scifi. Some shouted insults, calling her kind invaders and accusing them of plotting to steal Earth's resources. Before she could retreat, they spotted her shimmering form beneath the cloak and surrounded her. "Look what we have here," one man sneered, pointing at her. "A Scifi spy." Lizira's heart raced as panic set in. She tried to explain that she meant no harm, but her words were drowned out by jeers and accusations. Just as fear threatened to overwhelm her, A commanding voice cut through the commotion. "That's enough." Kale appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his imposing figure silencing the crowd instantly. His expression was stern as he stepped between Lizura and the protesters. "This is Princess Lizura, an honored guest of Earth," he said firmly. "Show some respect, or face the consequences." The protesters hesitated, clearly intimidated by his presence. One by one, they dispersed, grumbling under their breath but unwilling to challenge him directly. Once they were gone, Kale turned to Lizura, his features softening with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, offering her a hand. She hesitated for a moment before accepting it. "I'm fine," she replied, though her trembling voice betrayed her. "Thank you for stepping in." Kale nodded, studying her carefully. "What were you doing down here alone?" "It's not safe. I just wanted to see your world," she admitted quietly, "to understand it better." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kale sighed, running a hand through his short cropped hair. "I get it," he said finally. "Sometimes I need to escape too. But promise me you won't wander off like this again. Not without letting someone know where you are." His protectiveness caught her off guard. She had expected anger or frustration, but instead he sounded worried, almost tender. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Lizura stole glances at him, trying to reconcile the man beside her with the stories she'd heard. This wasn't the cold, calculating commander she'd feared. This was someone who put others' safety above all else, even when it came to protecting someone like her, a stranger bound to him by politics alone. Back aboard the orbital station, Kale escorted her to her quarters once more. Before parting ways, he paused, looking at her thoughtfully. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Lizura," he said softly. "Least of all to me." Her bioluminescent glow brightened faintly at his words, revealing emotion she hadn't realized she was holding back. For the first time, she saw Kale not as a symbol of humanity's strength, but as a person. Someone burdened by duty, yes, but also someone capable of kindness and understanding. That night, as Lizura lay awake staring at the ceiling, she reflected on everything she had learned about Kale. His actions spoke louder than any rumor ever could. Perhaps there was more to him than met the eye, and maybe, just maybe, their arranged marriage wouldn't be the nightmare she had dreaded. As the days passed, Lizura and Kale began spending more time together, not just in formal settings, but during quieter moments as well. The initial tension between them had softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity. They shared meals, walked through the orbital station's observation decks, and occasionally discussed the challenges of leadership. Each conversation brought them closer, peeling back layers of misunderstanding that had once separated them. One evening, after a particularly grueling round of negotiations, they found themselves alone on the station's observation deck. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before them, dotted with stars and swirling nebulae. Earth hung in the distance, its blue-green surface glowing faintly against the darkness. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply gaze at the breathtaking view. Finally, Kale broke the silence. "It's strange," he said, his voice low and contemplative. "Out here, looking at everything we fought over, it all seems so small." Lizura glanced at him, intrigued by the vulnerability in his tone. "Small," she echoed softly. "I would think someone like you, someone who commands armies, would see things differently." Kale chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "That's the thing about power," he replied. "The bigger it gets, the heavier it feels. Sometimes I wonder if anyone really understands what it's like to carry that weight." His words caught her off guard. She had always assumed that humans, especially leaders like Kale, thrived on dominance and control. But now, hearing him speak so openly, she realized there was far more beneath the surface. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Kale hesitated, as though weighing whether to share something deeply personal. Then, with a deep breath, he continued, When I was younger, my family lived on a colony near the edge of human territory. It wasn't much, a few farms, some trading posts, but it was home. One day, raiders attacked. We didn't stand a chance. His voice grew quieter, tinged with pain. I lost everyone that day. My parents, my little sister, gone in an instant. Lizara's heart ached for him. She had read about the incident in his file, but hearing it from him made it feel real in a way reports never could. Without thinking, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it conveyed empathy nonetheless. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. "That must have been unbearable." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as he fought to keep his emotions in check. After that, I joined the military. I told myself I was doing it to protect others, to make sure no one else suffered like I did. But the truth is, he paused, staring out at the stars. The truth is, I wanted revenge. I wanted to be strong enough to stop anyone who tried to hurt the people I cared about. And somewhere along the way, I became this person everyone expects me to be. Ruthless, unyielding, a machine. Lizara listened intently, her bioluminescent glow flickering faintly as her emotions swirled within her. This wasn't the Cal Draven she had heard about, the war hero whose name struck fear into enemies. This was a man burdened by loss, shaped by tragedy, and driven by a desire to prevent others from enduring the same pain. In that moment, she saw him not as a commander or a symbol of humanity's might, but as someone deeply human. "I know what it's like to carry expectations," she said quietly after a long pause. "Being royal isn't easy. Everyone looks to you for answers, for strength, for hope. They don't see you as a person. They see you as a figurehead. Sometimes, I feel like I'm drowning under the weight of their hopes." Cale turned to look at her, his piercing blue eyes softening with understanding. "That's why I admire you," he admitted. "You've handled this whole situation with grace, even though you were thrown into it without a choice. Most people wouldn't have lasted half as long." A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "And yet here we are," she said wryly. "Two strangers bound together by duty, trying to navigate something neither of us asked for." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Cale replied thoughtfully. "We're not so different, you and I. Both of us are fighting to protect our people, even if it means sacrificing pieces of ourselves along the way." Their conversation lingered in the air, filling the space between them with a newfound sense of connection. For the first time, Lizara allowed herself to imagine a future where this arrangement wasn't just a political obligation. It could be something more, something meaningful. Later that night, as she lay in bed reflecting on their talk, she realized how much she had underestimated Cale. Beneath his stoic exterior was a man capable of profound emotion, someone who understood her struggles in ways few others ever could. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to see glimpses of the kind of partnership they might build together. For the first time since learning of their engagement, Lizara felt a spark of hope, not just for peace between their peoples, but for herself and Cale as well. The fragile peace between humanity and the Zenari Empire was about to face its greatest test yet. Just as Lizara and Cale were beginning to forge a genuine connection, disaster struck aboard the orbital station. It started with a small malfunction, a flicker in the lights, followed by a brief power outage in one of the residential sectors. At first, no one paid much attention. Technical glitches happened occasionally, especially on such a massive facility. But when alarms began blaring throughout the station, panic spread like wildfire. Smoke poured from the engineering bay, and emergency protocols initiated an automatic lockdown. Crew members scrambled to contain the situation, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't a simple accident. Someone, or something, had deliberately sabotaged the station's systems. Communication channels went dark, leaving sections of the station isolated from each other. Chaos erupted as rumors spread among both humans and Zenari alike. Lizara was in her quarters when the first explosion rocked the station. Her heart raced as she steadied herself against the wall, her glowing skin dimming with fear. Outside, shouts echoed through the corridors as people ran for safety. She grabbed her communicator, trying desperately to reach Kale, but the signal was dead. Panic threatened to overwhelm her until there was a sharp knock at her door. "Princess," came a familiar voice. "It's me, Commander Draven." Relief washed over her as she opened the door to find Kale standing there, his armor slightly singed, but his expression resolute. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, scanning her for any signs of injury. "I'm fine," she replied shakily. "What's happening?" "We're under attack," Kale said grimly. "Someone has tampered with the station's core systems. We need to get you to a secure location." Before she could respond, another tremor shook the station, knocking them both off balance. Kale caught her arm, steadying her before motioning for her to follow him. Together, they moved swiftly through the chaotic hallways, dodging debris and panicked civilians. Along the way, Kale barked orders into his communicator, coordinating with his team to restore order and evacuate non-essential personnel. When they reached the command center, the scene was tense. Officers worked frantically to regain control of the station's systems, while others monitored security feeds for clues about the source of the sabotage. Kale wasted no time taking charge, issuing commands with calm precision. Despite the chaos around them, his presence inspired confidence, not just in his subordinates, but in Lizera as well. As the hours dragged on, fragments of information began to emerge. Initial reports suggested that Zenari separatists were behind the attack, hoping to derail the alliance by creating distrust between their peoples. The news sent shockwaves through the station. Humans glared suspiciously at Zenari delegates, while some Zenari muttered accusations against humanity. Tensions flared dangerously high, threatening to undo all the progress Lizera and Kale had made. But Kale refused to let fear dictate their response. Standing before a holo display showing damage reports, he turned to address the assembled leaders. "We can't afford to jump to conclusions," he said firmly. "Not now. If we start pointing fingers without evidence, we'll only play into whoever's hands caused this mess." Lizera stepped forward, her bioluminescent glow brightening with resolve. "He's right," she added, addressing the group. "This is exactly what our enemies want, to divide us. But we won't let them win. We must work together to uncover the truth." Her words resonated with many in the room, easing some of the tension. Under Kale's leadership, teams of humans and Zenari collaborated to investigate the source of the sabotage. As they sifted through data logs and security footage, patterns began to emerge. One piece of evidence stood out: encrypted transmissions traced back to a rogue alien syndicate known as the Vorthan Collective, a shadowy organization notorious for exploiting galactic conflicts for profit. They're using this crisis to destabilize the Alliance, Kale explained during a private briefing with Lizera later that night. "If we fall apart, they'll swoop in to pick up the pieces." Determined to stop them, Lizera insisted on playing an active role in resolving the situation. "I may not be a soldier, but I understand diplomacy," she said fiercely. "Let me speak to my people. Let me remind them why this alliance matters." Kale hesitated, concern etched across his face. "It's dangerous," he warned. "We still don't know who's behind this fully. What if someone targets you?" "I'll take that risk," she replied, her voice unwavering. "This isn't just your fight, it's ours too." Together, they devised a plan. While Cal coordinated efforts to neutralize the remaining threats within the station, Lizera addressed the Zenari delegation, appealing to their sense of unity and shared purpose. Her speech was heartfelt and powerful, reminding everyone of the sacrifices already made to bring humanity and the Zenari together. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. By the time the crisis was contained, the station was battered but intact. The rogue syndicate's plot had been exposed, and their operatives detained. Though tensions remained, the combined efforts of humans and Zenari proved stronger than anyone expected. As the dust settled, Lizera and Kale stood side by side, surveying the damage. "You did good today," Kale said quietly, offering her a rare smile. "You reminded everyone, including me, why we're doing this." Lizira returned the smile, her glowing form steady and radiant. "And you reminded me that strength isn't just about force," she replied. "It's about protecting what matters most." In that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of chaos, they realized something profound. Their partnership wasn't just symbolic, it was real. Together, they had faced adversity and emerged stronger, not as two individuals bound by duty, but as allies united by shared purpose. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, they were ready to face them head-on, together. The aftermath of the sabotage left Earth's orbital station battered but standing, a testament to the resilience of those who called it home. Repairs were underway, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet beneath the surface, emotions ran high. The attack had shaken everyone, humans and Zenari alike, and though the immediate danger had passed, lingering doubts threatened to undermine the fragile unity they had fought so hard to preserve. For Lizira, the days following the crisis were a whirlwind of reflection and decision-making. She spent hours in meetings with her advisors, discussing how to reassure her people that the alliance remained strong despite the attempted sabotage. But even as she worked tirelessly to mend fractures within the Zenari delegation, her thoughts kept drifting back to Kale. His unwavering leadership during the chaos had solidified her growing respect for him. More than that, his willingness to trust her, to include her in solving the crisis, had touched something deep inside her. On the eve of their wedding ceremony, Lizira found herself alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her and Kale, but for their peoples. The weight of the occasion pressed heavily on her shoulders. Was she truly ready for this? Could she commit herself fully to a man she had once feared, now someone she was beginning to admire? Her bioluminescent glow flickered faintly, reflecting her inner turmoil. For so long, she had seen this marriage as nothing more than a political obligation, a duty thrust upon her by circumstance. But over the past weeks, her perspective had shifted. Kale wasn't the cold, ruthless commander she had imagined. He was complex, compassionate, and deeply committed to protecting those under his care. And yet, could she trust her heart enough to let him in completely? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Startled, she turned to see Kale standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the dimly lit hallway. His armor was gone, replaced by simple civilian attire that made him look less intimidating, and somehow more human. "May I come in?" he asked gently, his piercing blue eyes searching hers. Lizira nodded, stepping aside to allow him entry. As he entered, she noticed the tension in his posture, the slight hesitation in his movements. Whatever had brought him here, it clearly weighed on him as much as her own uncertainties did on her. "I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "This isn't easy for either of us, and I don't want you to feel pressured into anything. If you're having second thoughts, I understand." His words caught her off guard. She had expected him to be confident, perhaps even assertive about the upcoming ceremony. Instead, he stood before her, offering her an out, a chance to walk away if she chose. "Why are you saying this?" she asked softly, tilting her head in confusion. Kale sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Because I care about what happens next. For both of us. This isn't just about politics or alliances anymore. It's about two people trying to build something real. If you're not ready, I won't push you. All I ask is honesty." His sincerity struck a chord within her. Here was a man who had faced countless battles, endured unimaginable loss, and carried the weight of entire worlds on his shoulders. And yet he was willing to step back, to prioritize her feelings over everything else. In that moment, Lizira realized she no longer feared him. What she felt instead was admiration, respect, and something deeper. "I'm not sure I can give you perfection," she admitted quietly, meeting his gaze. I've never been good at trusting others, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. But these past weeks, seeing how you handle challenges, how you fight for what matters most, it's changed me. You've shown me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty, and kindness doesn't have to mean weakness. Kale listened intently, his expression softening as she spoke. When she paused, he took a cautious step closer. "Lizzie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't expect perfection from you, or from myself. I know we're different, and I know we'll face obstacles. But if we face them together, I believe we can overcome anything." Tears welled up in Lizzie's eyes, though her glowing skin remained steady. She had always prided herself on her composure, her ability to remain calm under pressure. But now, standing before Kale, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. "I thought I hated you once," she confessed, smiling faintly. "But now, I think I might love you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unfiltered. Kale's breath caught, and for a moment, he simply stared at her, as though unsure he had heard correctly. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire demeanor. "You have no idea how much that means to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think it was possible to feel this way about someone like you. Someone so different, yet so extraordinary." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, simply basking in the newfound understanding between them. For the first time, Lizzie felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would navigate it side by side. As Kale left her quarters later that night, promising to see her at the ceremony, Lizzie returned to the window. The stars twinkled beyond the glass, their light endless and eternal. Tomorrow, she would take a leap of faith, not just for herself, but for the future of humanity and the Scifi. And though fear still lingered at the edges of her mind, it was overshadowed by hope. For the first time in her life, Lizzie believed that love could blossom even in the unlikeliest of places, and as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of a brighter tomorrow. One where differences weren't barriers, but bridges. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with Earth's twin suns casting golden light across the orbital station. The ceremony was set to take place in the Grand Observation Hall, a vast chamber designed to showcase the beauty of space. Transparent walls revealed an endless expanse of stars, nebulae, and distant planets, creating a breathtaking backdrop for what would be one of the most historic moments in galactic history. Lizzie stood before a full-length mirror in her quarters, adjusting the intricate folds of her ceremonial gown. The fabric shimmered like liquid starlight, woven with threads that glowed softly in sync with her bioluminescent skin. Her attendants bustled around her, offering final touches to her appearance, but her mind was elsewhere. Today marked not only the union of two individuals, but also the joining of two civilizations, a symbolic step toward peace after centuries of mistrust. As she prepared, Lizzie reflected on how far she had come since arriving at the orbital station. She had entered this arrangement filled with fear and doubt, convinced that Commander Cal Draven was everything she feared in humanity. Cold, ruthless, unyielding. But over time, she had discovered layers beneath his hardened exterior: compassion, vulnerability, and a quiet strength that inspired trust rather than fear. Now, as she prepared to walk down the aisle, she felt no hesitation. This wasn't just duty, it was choice, and it was hers alone. Across the station, Kale stood in his own quarters, staring at his reflection in silence. His formal uniform was immaculate, adorned with medals earned through years of service, yet he barely noticed them. Instead, his thoughts lingered on the woman waiting for him beyond those doors, the woman who had transformed his understanding of partnership and purpose. He had entered this arrangement believing it was simply another mission, another challenge to overcome. But Lizzie had shown him something deeper, the possibility of connection, even between two worlds so different from each other. When the moment arrived, Lizzie stepped into the observation hall accompanied by Elder Vale, her trusted advisor. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she made her entrance, her glowing form radiating an ethereal beauty that left everyone awestruck. Humans and Zenari alike turned to watch her progress down the aisle, their differences momentarily forgotten in shared awe. At the end of the aisle stood Kale, his tall frame silhouetted against the cosmic panorama behind him. As Lizira approached, their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the rest of the universe seemed to fade away. When she reached him, Kale extended a hand, which she accepted without hesitation. Together, they faced the officiant, a respected elder chosen jointly by both sides to preside over the ceremony. The ritual itself blended traditions from both cultures. Words were spoken in ancient Zenari dialects and human languages, weaving together promises of unity, loyalty, and hope. Rings exchanged between them symbolized not only their bond, but also the bridge they hoped to build between their peoples. As the final vows were sealed, applause erupted throughout the chamber, echoing off the walls and filling the air with joy. Afterward, during the reception held in their honor, delegates from countless species mingled freely, celebrating the historic occasion. Music played, laughter filled the room, and plates of exotic delicacies circulated among guests. For the first time, humans and Zenari sat side by side, sharing stories and forging connections that transcended cultural barriers. Standing together near the edge of the observation deck, Lizira and Kale watched as representatives from across the galaxy offered their congratulations. "Do you think we've done enough?" Lizira asked quietly, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. Kale smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've taken the first step," he replied. "There will still be challenges ahead, but as long as we face them together, I believe anything is possible." She nodded, her glowing skin steady and radiant. "For the first time, I truly believe that too." As the evening wore on, whispers of optimism spread throughout the station and beyond. News of the successful union traveled quickly, inspiring hope in corners of the galaxy where distrust had once reigned supreme. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with obstacles, Lizira and Kale stood ready to lead, not just as rulers or commanders, but as partners united by love and purpose. In the days and weeks that followed, their efforts to strengthen ties between humanity and the Zenari bore fruit. Joint initiatives launched, cultural exchanges flourished, and plans for collaborative projects signaled a brighter future for both races. Through every triumph and setback, Lizira and Kale remained steadfast, proving that even the most unlikely alliances could blossom into something extraordinary. And so, under the watchful gaze of countless stars, a new dawn broke across the galaxy, one built on trust, understanding, and the unwavering belief that together, humanity and the Zenari could achieve greatness. For Princess Lizira and Commander Kel Draven, the journey had only just begun, but it was a journey they embraced with open hearts and boundless hope.